Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for joining today. I am your moderator for today's session. My name is Christina Mays. I'm with Dominican University, California, located in the Bay Area, San Rafael specifically. And I'm part of our ABLE Digital Ethics Task Force. Best fruit there is. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Rebecca Thomas, who will be presenting on designing effective reflective prompts for ePortfolios. So as we begin into today's session, we want to go over a few guidelines. We like to propose that if you would like to add any others that are important to you, please put them into the chat. Everybody here is to learn and challenge their preconceived notions and biases, listen without judgment, be open to receive feedback, and discuss an argument, not a person. We encourage you to subscribe to the ABLE newsletter. Here you will find so much information from this wonderful collection of resources and support. We also have ABLE events, such as the one that's being hosted today. So please do subscribe. We do have the 2026 ePortfolio Forum, which will be coming up September 23rd to 24th. We have an open call for proposals, which will close on June 26th. So you have 10 more days from the moment of this recording. And in case you didn't pick up on the Digital Ethics Task Force, this is a lovely group of those that are committed to the integrity and digital ethics of ePortfolio and all that goes in and out of the intersections of the work that we do here. So deadline is September 15th. Join us. ABLE Shark Tank 2026. Pitch your innovative ideas to our ePortfolio experts for feedback and prizes. Ooh, I wonder what kind of prizes we have. I'm sure they're going to be good. So join us. The water's warm. Okay, so I am going to hand it over now to our presenter.
Hey, thank you. And I've shared the screen. Is everybody able to see it okay? Give a thumbs up. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm co-presenting today with Christa Matlack, so she's on here. Hopefully she is able to jump in. We're from Bucknell University, and so I'm the current faculty director of the university-wide Pathways ePortfolio program at Bucknell. We've just completed our 5th official year of having an ePortfolio program, and I have been the inaugural director for the past 4 years. I didn't put it on my slide, but in addition to being the faculty director for the ePortfolio program, I am associate teaching professor in the electrical and computer engineering department. So you'll see some of my examples in my context will come out as being in that role as well. And I will go ahead and let Christa jump in and introduce herself.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Christa Matlack. I am actually a 2011 Bucknell grad, and I now work at the Center for Career Advancement on campus as a career coach, focusing more on the STEM industries. But I'm also kind of the go-to person in our office when it comes to ePortfolios and how they kind of can connect to the professional development of our students.
Yes, I'm so lucky to have Christa as one of my best collaborators on campus. And we are also so honored to go after that wonderful keynote presentation that we all just got to hear. Right. So, we talk a lot about reflection in ePortfolios, and some of our celebrities are on the call, so I don't need to tell most of you about it, but kind of just for context, right? Reflection, right? It's often been called the cornerstone and foundation of ePortfolios. As I mentioned, we've been it's been about 5 years since we've been working on ePortfolios at Bucknell. And so we've learned a lot about reflection, both from the ePortfolio community, particularly in being involved with AAEEBL over these past 5 years, and through our work with students. So we've discovered, right, a couple of simple truths, but things that we think are really helpful. And those are, number one, that reflection is challenging. And number two, that better prompts yield better quality of student work and engagement, right? So when I first started engaging with the ePortfolio community, one of the favorite quotes I heard was, right, garbage in, garbage out. Right, if your prompts are bad, if your assignments are bad, like students aren't going to do good work. But reflection, right, it's really hard. It's really subjective. And the term takes on different meanings based on context. And having some structure behind what we talk to when we're talking about reflection helps us move beyond kind of vague general reflections. So today we're going to introduce a couple of frameworks that we've found broadly applicable and helpful to provide grounding and common language for our reflection. So I can't talk about reflection without asking my participants to reflect. So we'll start with a short reflection exercise. For this reflection, I'd like you to choose a course you taught or some kind of activity that you have led. We've proposed here 4 different prompts that for you to think about this activity. Of course, we're on a set time here, so you're not going to have time to answer all 4 of these. You probably only have time to do 1 or 2. So start by choosing one and, just kind of on scrap paper, wherever you want, start to work on a response for that. So I will be quiet and give you a few minutes to pick one of these out and start to answer it. All right, well, I'm sure that wasn't enough time. I do promise that we will come back to these. So hopefully you've got a minute of time to reflect here. Before we move on, I wanted to kind of propose a definition of reflection, and also, right, even though we can't have one universal definition, that there are some common themes that come up when we talk about reflection, and I'm just going to identify a few of those. So, right, reflection is an educational construct, and it has many different forms and definitions for various purposes. But I think we can agree it's a critical component of learning that makes thinking visible. So some of the consistent themes that we see in various definitions of reflection include, right, it being a habit, it being necessary for integrative learning, and it being a tool for making meaning from learning. I also have a hard time giving a reflection talk without having a John Dewey quote on there, right? So we've got the obligatory John Dewey quote. Right. And while reflection has always been important, it is now a critical priority. Right? With the prevalence and abilities of AI, a final product that can be generated by AI no longer proves learning. So we need to get below the surface of our iceberg here and assess the thinking, the decision-making, and the learning process itself. So far we've presented an overview of reflection and its importance. So next we'll present some frameworks and that common language to prompt reflection that is effective. Well, Christa's going to start us out here.
So one of the frameworks that Rebecca and I are going to kind of reference that Bucknell is kind of using when it comes to reflection and ePortfolios is the Taxonomy of Reflective Inquiry. I'm probably going to call it TORI from now on. It's a little bit easier for me to say. But the TORI framework organizes skills, types, and purposes of reflection into more of a cohesive system. And that system contains the 6 domains that are kind of listed on the screen here for you, but also over 60 categories, like subcategories within the domains and across the domains that can be utilized to help kind of figure out what you're trying to get these students to reflect upon. Thank you, Christina. I was actually just going to drop that in the chat, but she dropped the link for me anyway. So Christina just dropped the link to the TORI domains in the chat. The nice thing about this framework is that it's really adaptable. So through the TORI framework, users have the ability to kind of explore, combine, adjust categories to suit whatever that context is. So it really is going to help the user apply like integrated learning across different areas of your student's experience. And so that's kind of why we have really taken to it. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on that higher level of what are these 6 domains and how we can use that to help ground our reflection. But we do encourage you to kind of check out more details on the categories within each of the domains. They do give some great examples of like really basic sample prompts and activities that you could do with students of varying age levels to help get at those different domains and the subcategories within the domains.
Okay. In addition to domains, having different categories of reflection can also help us name how our students are reflecting. So in my work, I mentioned earlier that I teach engineering. And so when I went to the literature, I wasn't able to find a whole lot about doing reflection in this context. Right. And I wasn't exactly sure how engineering reflection might be similar or different to other types of reflection. So I started out by looking at my students' actual reflections that they were doing and doing some coding work on their reflections. So I really read what they wrote. And when I saw something that was that I thought was reflective, I highlighted it. And then kind of categorize things together. And I did this, with a colleague, so I wasn't just making things up. And so when I got all of these kind of coded and categorized, I went back to the literature and tried to find a framework that aligned well with my observations. So the one I found and that I'm kind of proposing as using for categories of reflection is the one shown on this slide. It's a widely cited framework based on reflective writing in teaching contexts, and it defines 4 categories of reflection. So just having 4 keeps it pretty easily. And then like we did, you might find that one of these categories just more closely aligns with kind of your initial thoughts of reflection. So for us, that was dialogic reflection. So a lot of what I was categorizing or highlighting when I looked at reflection and thought about what I thought it meant for students to reflect fell in that dialogic category. But I'll give a brief description of all 4 of them. So the first level on this categorization is descriptive writing, which is more about reporting what happened than explaining the why. Commonly in my students' work, I found that students would describe outcomes in a list starting with, and during this lab, I learned ... So although this is identified as the first category of reflection, it's not truly reflective because students are more just reporting events. So the next category is descriptive reflection, which starts to provide more reasons and address the why. This type starts to be reflective, where someone is evaluating and explaining their rationale. Next is dialogic reflection, where one starts questioning their assumptions and considers different perspectives. In this type of reflection, students are really bringing more of themselves into the process. And then finally, there's critical reflection, where one starts seeing the less obvious connections to the bigger picture beyond themselves or the surface level context. All right, so as promised, we're going to go back to those 4 prompts that we started with in the beginning. So in case you forgot them completely, I have them again on this slide. And I also have 4 questions about those prompts. So for the 4 questions about the prompts, I'd like you to kind of think about those responses and provide some of your responses in the chat. So, right, the questions are kind of which prompt did you choose from the above prompts 1 through 4, and why? Which category of reflection do you think was targeted by that prompt? Which TORI domain? And lastly, right, kind of your bonus question, if you want to target a different category or TORI domain, could you think about how you might modify the prompt? And Christa, since you can probably see the responses better, do you want to lead this conversation?
Sure. Yep, I have the chat open. Debbie chose number 4. She says her students appreciate making connections. She tries to modify prompts to be broad and specific to integrate course content and comment on their experience. Diego, he picked 4 and domain 3 because it helps with metacognitive thinking. In his W131 class, they do a lot of self-reflective writing, but he also does a lengthy module on media literacy, which involves them diving into their background assumptions and where their own thoughts, opinions, etc. come from. Andrew has prompt number 3 as dialogic and focused on domain 1, which is cognitive and analytical, but his response hit more into domain 5, the cognitive process, but content related to context. And domain 5 is the cultural, ethical, and contextual domain. And then Candace, she went quickly to the second question, why, and thinks her response was critical reflection for TORI, probably domain 2, but also potentially domain 5.
All right. Yeah, that's great. It seems like you all are overachievers and didn't just go. A lot of times when I've done this with people who are less familiar with reflection, they'll pick kind of prompts 1 and 2. I think probably because those are easier. Also, because I tell you ahead of time, you're not going to get a whole lot of time. But you guys are doing a great job in identifying kind of categories and TORI domains. Sonia, I see you have your hand up, so I will let you ask your question.
So I was typing, I didn't get it finished, and I kind of need both well, I don't really need the reflections, but I need the domains. And then I was just like, I kind of wanted it all in front of me. And then I am not quite done with my answer, although it's short, I promise you. But part of it is that I think there's so much overlap in the domains, and it really, there's contextual pieces to it, and sort of depends on how I answered the prompts. And so then I just get into this rabbit hole of reflection. And so that was just a noticing I had that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation that I think Diego also said, right? Is sometimes we can see or we assume that students are going to answer prompts a specific way and it's going to, right, go into a certain domain or even a certain category. And right, the way someone answers a prompt can be much different than assumed. I also did this with one prompt that I wrote, which I don't have in here, but I just asked students what sparks their interest. And right, I expected students to kind of talk about something personal and like go into this. And then it was an engineering course, so I had a lot of students tell me that they were interested in like kind of bland technical things, like I don't know, circuits and creating circuit boards and right. So yeah, even our best attempts, sometimes you don't know how the response is gonna go. Yeah, but we did write these four to kind of intentionally give you examples of the four reflection categories. So, right, they kind of went in order. We started with a simpler prompt, right? Just a listing out what are the topics, what do students do, right? And then next is the descriptive reflection, more of the why, the dialogic reflection, bringing yourself in, and then the critical reflection, the making bigger connections. So what might have helped on some of this is that we do have a worksheet to guide you through some of um, our reflections and domains, and we're going to kind of walk you through this worksheet. But actually, Christa's going to do that, so I'm going to turn it back over to her, and she, I think, will share out that worksheet first. Is that right,
Yep.
Christa? Okay.
That is right. It's already in the chat. Please let me know if you can open it. I did change the Google Drive settings, so everyone should be able to view the document. Perfect. Thank you, Allie, for confirming that it works. So we're going to walk through this worksheet, which we kind of built, and to Sonia's point, to have it all in front of us a little bit better. And so what we did was we kind of created this document to help with a faculty workshop where we talked about developing these reflective prompts. So we're going to kind of walk through this activity. And so what we want you to do is to really start to think about where you're using reflection and to help develop a prompt using the frameworks that we kind of just reviewed with you. So the first step of the worksheet is to really clarify the purpose for this reflection that you're creating. So thinking about that context where you want to do this reflective activity with a group of students, can you answer the two questions presented? And so obviously you probably don't have access to a printer right now. Maybe you can edit the PDF, but on a piece of scratch paper, thinking about that context, what do you want the learner to gain? So whoever's doing this reflective activity, what do you want them to gain? And at what point in the learning cycle is this reflection situated? Because when we think about the reflection, it can be while the learning is in progress, like in the middle of a project. It could be looking back, or it could be something that's looking ahead. And so, thinking about those things, you would take just a minute to kind of write down your thoughts on those two questions. And then the next step on the worksheet is to look at those TORI domains, right? And I loved the chatter about all of the overlap because that we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's really important that you try to nail down which domains you're hoping to, and that's where sometimes also diving into their subcategories can help you better align your prompts as well. So thinking about this group of students, what you want them to gain when in this process of learning, are they reflecting upon this experience? Try to pick which domain or domains, because it can be multiple, that you want the learner to focus on. And so you have to have an understanding of that to be able to better structure the language of your prompt. So if you do have that TORI website open, explore some of those subcategories and see if you can, even tailor it further down to better target that learning goal. All right. I know we're not giving you a lot of time to get through these things. We're trying to give you a little bit, but also being mindful of time. The next step is determining that level of reflection. So thinking about what level you want to achieve for this activity, but you have to keep in mind the considerations that we kind of have listed here on the screen when you're developing your prompts. For example, we can't expect like a group of first-year students to just jump into critical reflection. They're just not prepared for that. They haven't had enough experience reflecting. They haven't had enough lived experience to maybe pull in some of the things that we would want them to hit at the level of critical reflection. So because they haven't had enough time and experience, we want to make sure that we're creating prompts that are relevant to the student population. We also have to consider things like their cultural background, their educational background. So some students come into higher education with a lot more reflective background than others. So knowing your student population and where they sit in these different consideration areas is really important. So start to think about that because that will help when we go to phrase your prompts. All right. So the next step is probably the one that would take the longest. So we might need to give you a little time if we're going to work through this. But this table was kind of designed to, one, keep your TORI domain in mind, or domains, whichever you're targeting. But then using that scaffolding, like the table to help scaffold your prompts. And so what you can do is like in that descriptive writing category, start to think about, if I want them to just explain what happened, how can I write that prompt? And so it allows you space to kind of practice some of that language and to try to get them to the point of that critical reflection if that's what the ultimate goal is for your group. For some of you, if you're working with a group of first-year students, maybe you're just hoping to get them past descriptive reflection and into some of that dialogic reflection. So always keep in mind what your original goal was. But we wanted to provide a space. So if you are working with a group of senior students in a capstone project, for example, that you have the ability to develop some scaffolding for a student population that you're trying to get to that critical reflection. And then just remembering always that phrasing of the prompt is what's gonna really help the student understand what you want them to provide in that reflection. So if we're seeking that critical reflection, we have to make sure that we're prompting those students to consider the external systems, pressures, things that are influencing the situation or experience we're talking about. If we don't bring that up, we can't expect or assume that they will always pull those external factors into their reflection.
Krista, we have a
Mhm.
few comments. There's like
Yep.
a nice discussion going on. So Andrew notes, my favorite thing, and the thing I was writing about, is when students read a prompt intended to elicit a reflection and interpret it as a knowledge check. And then we have Debbie who says, oh yes, that happens even in composition. LR comments, my view is that any assignment is interpreted in that way. It seems that work, reflective or not, equals a knowledge check in their minds. And then Andrew comments, true, especially when the other accessible tasks we give them, in fact, are knowledge checks.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Students definitely, I think, view any sort of assignment or activity in class as some sort of a knowledge check. And the one thing I have found though in my career course is um, some of our prompts aren't really like it's not a knowledge check. It's more like we're asking them to talk about themselves, right? And so that you just have to do the assignment, and so there's no real knowledge that we're checking on them. And some of those tend to be some of the most engaging and very personal reflections we get because we're asking them more about their values and what's important to them, and they're given that space to be vulnerable and provide that. And so I think it's kind of cool in our course that we have that it doesn't always feel this way. For some of them, sure, certainly does feel like a knowledge check, but we've been lucky enough in our career course to have some pretty, really personal reflections that you can tell that the students were being really thoughtful about how their values might impact which type of career or company they want to work for, and things like that. So I appreciate the conversation. Rebecca, are you ready for the next one?
Oh, I was gonna jump in just a little bit
Yeah.
there, I think. And so I did some work and I can find the papers and put them in here somewhere. But I looked at kind of the impact of having students do reflection in an e-portfolio and practice reflection. And I looked at students' reflection, kind of looking at a cohort that had went through the course before I added the ePortfolio and comparing them with a cohort that had went through afterward. Um, and so I found, right, that this descriptive writing is what students naturally do. Um, so, right, so that didn't really change before or after the ePortfolio. Students think that that's what you're asking them to do, and they kind of naturally do that. But the descriptive reflection and most specifically the dialogic reflection, SL students do a lot more of that. And it's just, I think, right, kind of giving them the prompts and showing them that this is what you're looking for, really help them to do that like on their own. And then the thing that I coded were lab reports that weren't e-portfolio reflections themselves, but and then what I saw was critical reflection. I hadn't prompted, so I didn't see the students get any better at that, but it was kind of a fault on right, that I hadn't asked them to practice it, so that they didn't know that they were supposed to do that. So I think that kind of aligns with our knowledge check discussion a little bit, right? In that, like, kind of if we prompt the other categories and show them that, hopefully that helps kind of get more of the results that we are wanting to see.
Yeah, and Candace just commented in the chat on a similar note that she finds even giving them examples helps them know that it's okay to share and actually know what reflection is and what it looks like. So I think that's great. Diego commented as well. I think to some extent it's because students have a tendency to hear teachers talk about critical thinking, but don't quite define it for them in a way that provides them a framework or process until they get to us. But even social media finger wags about a lack of critical thinking, so they're aware of it, but it seems ephemeral, or not ephemeral, but spontaneous. You either have it or you don't, rather than something learned. And then to return, sorry, my child is trying to get into the bedroom right now while I'm at my desk. To return to the critical reflection portion, they need plenty of examples, like Candace was saying, modeling, and generally some kind of framework that they can apply to interrogate their experience in a way that doesn't seem like another laundry list of questions that they need to answer in a series, but rather unlocks their reflective process. It's a wonderful thought there, Diego. Okay, so let's go on because be mindful of time. We don't have a whole lot of time left. Continuing the scaffolding of prompts, a lot of times, like, because there's some disparity in like the educational background and some of those considerations we had talked about previously, scaffolding is like the best practice to get students where they need to be. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the knocking, but what we provided here was kind of an example of scaffolding for reflections for personal growth and self-development, kind of within the career realm. So when we're asking students to think about their internship experiences and the responsibilities that they had, what skills they developed, how they developed them, these are ways that you can kind of scaffold the student from that descriptive writing all the way through critical reflection. Okay, so the last step of this is to test the prompt. And so what we kind of want to do once we kind of scaffolded those out, we can take a look at our prompts and go back to the original questions and make sure that they're aligned with what we were hoping for the learner from the beginning. So revisiting the TORI domains and trying to see like which domain is this actually targeting? What level of reflection would be required? Thanks, Allie. What level of reflection would be required? And then the most important one is, could a student answer this with just surface level description? And so take a minute and try to like look at the prompts that you kind of worked on and revisit those questions to test your prompts out. All right. So that was kind of like the whole process that we've kind of pulled together to try to develop really effective prompts in a more systematic and strategic way to ensure we're kind of hitting those learning goals that we're hoping for our students. And then the last kind of slide we have here is to really think about common mistakes. And I know from my perspective in our career course, our first year doing that course, our prompts were not good enough. They were not getting at what we wanted the students to reflect on. It was a lot of really surface level conversation. But as we refined the prompts, the student responses and the student work got a lot better. And it got a lot deeper than just, surface level describing who they are. The one I want to focus in on is, like we had brought up in a conversation previously, is that mixing of the TORI domains. There's lots of overlap. We know it's messy. Reflection is not always clear cut. Like we talked about, we expect students to answer one way and they answer in a totally different direction. So when we think about that, if we want a student to reflect on both personal growth and emotional processing when it comes to something that was a challenging experience for them, when we develop those prompts, it needs to be really clear what we're asking them to reflect on. And sometimes we can achieve that by adding like a multi-question prompt, right? So that way we can focus one specific question on that personal growth from that challenging experience, but also like, what were you feeling in that moment when you were being challenged? And how did you respond to those emotions and things like that? So having some multi-question prompts can oftentimes help provide a little bit more clarity for the students. And then Debbie asked, have you found that some intentional blends work well together? I think, from a career perspective, I oftentimes see a lot of the that kind of personal self-development. I can't remember which domain that is. I'm gonna have to pull up my slides for myself here. The personal growth and self-development, which is domain number 4. That one works really well blending with, obviously, it's things like life transitions, right? So especially when we're thinking about our seniors who are going to graduate and leave and go off to that first destination job, that is a huge life transition for them. But there's a lot of personal growth that took them to get there. There's a lot of self-development that they did to get there. So thinking about ways that you can overlap and blend some of these domains together are really helpful. Rebecca, do you have anything that you found has worked as far as blending some of these together?
I don't know that I've thought a lot about that yet. That's a really good question. Were there any that Debbie had in mind, or?
No, this is just making me think about the way I shape my prompts differently. So I'm just like having one of those out of body moments. I would want to hear more from you guys.
All right. Well, we're running out of time, but I did want to talk a little bit about AI and kind of how we should consider it when we're doing reflective prompts. Right? AI is obviously changing the ways we do a lot of things in education and kind of all over our lives. Right? We know it can be a helpful tool, but we also need to make sure that too much is not outsourced to AI and that work is authentic. But since writing prompts can be challenging, we can try AI as a tool to help brainstorm and refine our prompts. So I've used AI to help me consider how complex to make a prompt. Like if I know that, I can expect students to work on an hour on this ePortfolio page, right? I can kind of have AI estimate how long it thinks the student should take to write a reflection. AI can also help adjust the level of reflection. So if I can't quite figure out kind of how to get to that level of critical reflection, I can, ask AI to get some ideas and pick one that I like or refine one that I like. So I've kind of used AI to both like rapidly prototype and stress test my prompt, right? So another thing, right, if we're worried about students using AI to respond to prompts, we can ask AI to respond to our prompts like a student. Right. And so if AI does a pretty good job at responding to the prompt, then a student might be tempted to outsource their reflection as well. Or it might be, right, that the prompt's just not very personal and right, AI can do an okay job. So just as an example of a prompt that I've used AI to kind of help me refine. So in this course, was reading, the class was reading Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. So in the book's introduction, it provides the statistic on the slide. Only 27% of college graduates have a career related to their majors. So on the book's website, right, there's a kind of discussion question, reflection prompt about the statistic, right? So I would show that in the first block. And it's a pretty good reflection, right? It hits kind of the descriptive, dialogic reflection levels. But my course was specifically, and the participants were all first-year engineering students, right? So I wanted to make the prompt fit our context a little bit better, right? So the second prompt version there is adjusting it kind of for that first year developmental spot and right in the engineering context. And then I wanted to just try to promote a higher level of reflection. So the third prompt kind of shows how I refine the prompt a little bit further to try to get at least an emerging aspects of that critical reflection. All right. So it's really hard to kind of eliminate AI or students using AI entirely. And right, this is a work in progress for us to figure out, right, how students are going to use AI and how to encourage them to really do authentic reflection. So, we don't have this all figured out yet, but we do have a few tips kind of we're offering on this slide. So by having more specific and personal reflection, kind of like I mentioned before, tying reflection to artifacts. So, right, this is a natural part of ePortfolios, so we're at a benefit there, right? Always remembering reflection as an iterative process, right? It's not one and done like college basketball players, but students need to be kind of reflecting ongoing. And then allowing and or requesting multimodal forms of reflection, right? Not just always having students do a written reflection is another tip we recommend. So I know we're running short on time, but we have just a little bit left here. So this is kind of a student favorite ePortfolio reflection prompt that Christa and I used this together. We had a cohort of first gen students. So we weren't really thinking about AI as like the main focus when we wrote this prompt. But it asks students to think about the growth, their personal growth, and connect it to a song. Right. So right, music is personal for a lot of people. Right, music it's kind of fun. So we think this is a pretty good prompt. Of course, it's not perfect, so we do have some questions, right? What's good about the prompt? What can be what can be improved? And did it follow those tips that we we had. And our tips are on here, so you can see. Does anybody have any responses? I see stuff coming up in the chat, but I can't read it.
I can read the chat for you.
Okay.
There's quite a number of comments. So the idea of testing a prompt through AI, Debbie loves this idea. Diego agrees. The more I use it, the more I recognize typical LLMisms that show up in the text it produces. It's not X, it's Y, along with the vague non-committal language. Debbie, yes, with a moreover to open the third or fourth paragraph. And Andrew, I just asked myself whether it sounds like a promoted LinkedIn post, and that usually does the job. I've been playing a lot to myself with AI, and I use it as a breaking the barrier to creative writing, to get messy, to be reflective, and to bring it all together. And so I wanted to talk in here so much, but I will pause myself. We have 5 minutes.
One thing to note, I know Debbie, you said you would love to see some of the student reflections. Tomorrow, we are talking about the ePortfolio cohort where we utilize that song reflection. So we will touch on one of the students. We have permission to share one of the student guys. So we will be kind of touching on that again tomorrow in our other presentation. And it says, I do think the more we think about reflection as a conversation, the better our prompts are. I love that.
We don't ask things like name 3 reasons why you enjoy blah, blah. We don't talk like that.
Yeah, and I know there's going to be a lot of AI talk. Yeah, but like Christa mentioned, we presented this to some of our faculty here in collaboration with our Teaching and Learning Center. And that was something that they kind of specifically wanted us to address was, right, kind of what are some of the benefits, right, of having students reflect. But we also, I think, felt like we needed to take that step also and kind of discuss, right, how can we ensure that we're having that really, right, that we're promoting the authentic reflection as much as possible and not making it, right, not making it things where students just want to outsource it. Yeah, Christina, do you have your hand up?
Question for you. Have you talked with your students about using AI for reflection to kind of gauge whether they are doing it, not doing it, considering it, or whether they are behind the idea of, no, this is actually me. If my instructor does want to know what I really think and not what just had been statistically produced by an LLM?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit different of a direction I was thinking in answering that, right? So, we mentioned we have our framework that we're using is from Digication, and we use Digication here at Bucknell. But Digication also has like that TORI domain built into their ePortfolio platform, so that students can kind of get a real-time feedback on their reflection from AI. So it is using AI, but right in a hopefully more productive way, right? So it's using AI to enhance their reflection rather than to kind of replace their reflection. And I've done that with some of my students, and generally I see students being doing much longer reflection, kind of doing a lot of reflection, and then that yeah, but AI is it's very tricky. It's and I know different students can take it differently. And in engineering, my students tend to be a little bit maybe more AI friendly than other places, but it's there are many different views across campus with both faculty and students. So yeah. Sonia, do you want to ask? Maybe we have time for a quick question.
I just was, while you were talking and some of the conversation, I just was thinking about students, and I've read papers about students who like are being accused of using AI but are not using it, and like then having to like go back and try to go and like structure it so that it doesn't look as polished as a way to like show that it's not AI. And I just wonder about in like our, the way that we've moved towards standardized testing and like some of the No Child Left Behind stuff in this country in particular, like that we've conditioned students to write in a certain way. And so like the AI more easily matches the way that we have asked students to write in our school system. And a lot of the things that are shifted in ePortfolio use and some of the ways that I know that we all teach and are teaching and, regardless of ePortfolio or not, like really ask students to engage more in like what Candace said is a conversation in the back and forth. And just as a different approach. And I always like get frustrated with the need to police cheating because I just think it's an incredible waste of time. Like I don't like whatever, use it. It's your loss. These are skills that you need. And if students understand the urgency behind the skills and are engaged in their learning, they're not going to cheat. They're going to use AI in a way that is helps them think better and like challenges them. And so one thing that just I keep thinking about is like that rift of educators who feel that way versus the ones that are constantly like, I must track and do all this stuff, is like there's kind of a divide happening there. And I don't have anything else to say about it. Just like I'm noticing it in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we're coming from, just promoting tips that like hopefully will help rather than I guess leaving the opportunity up there or out there and then right having to deal with it. Hopefully, yeah, an ounce of prevention helps.
Well, we have come to time. Let's thank our presenters. Thank you so much.